Our topic is new immigrants. Beginning in the 1890s and continuing into the 1920s, the national origins of most immigrants changed.
The new immigrants came from Eastern and Southern Europe.
Many were poor and illiterate peasants who had left autocratic countries and therefore were unaccustomed to democratic traditions.
The newcomers were largely Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Jewish.
On arrival, most new immigrants crowded into poor ethnic neighborhoods in major U.S. cities, having to first go through semi-difficult processes at immigration centers such as Ellis Island in New York. Next up, let's talk about Ellis Island.
Ellis Island was opened as an immigration center in 1892, and new arrivals had to pass more rigorous medical examinations and pay a tax before entering the United States. Welcome back. Our next topic is restricting immigration.
Efforts to restrict immigration were supported by diverse groups such as labor unions,
who feared that employers would use immigrants to depress wages and break strikes.
a nativist society, the American Protective Association,
which was openly prejudiced against Roman Catholics,
and social Darwinists,
who viewed the new immigrants as biological inferiors to English and German stocks.
However, the foreigners became a scapegoat for jobless workers as well as for employers during a severe depression in the 1890s. Our next topic is migration of Mexicans and African Americans.
Job opportunities in wartime America, as well as the revolution in Mexico, caused thousands of Mexicans to cross the border to work in agriculture and mining.
Many traveled to the Midwest for factory jobs, and African Americans also took advantage of the job opportunities that were made available through the departure of thousands of men for war and migrated north.
Our next topic is Marcus Garvey.
Marcus Garvey, an immigrant from Jamaica, advocated individual and racial pride for African Americans and developed political ideas of Black nationalism.
He established an organization for Black separatism, economic self-sufficiency, and the Back to Africa movement.
Garvey's sale of stock in the Black Star Steamship Line led to federal charges of fraud.
In 1925, he was tried, convicted, and jailed.
Later, he was deported to Jamaica and his movement collapsed. Next up, let's talk about the Red Scare.
In 1919, following the Great War, the United States suffered from a combination of unhappiness with the peace process, fear of communism fueled by the communist takeover in Russia, and worries of labor unrest at home.
The anti-German hysteria quickly turned into anti-communist hysteria, known as the Red Scare.
These anti-racial fears also fueled xenophobia that resulted in restriction to immigration in the 1920s. Our next topic is the quota laws.
In the early 1920s, Congress passed two laws that severely limited immigration by setting quotas based on nationality.
The first Quota Act of 1921 limited immigration to 3% of the number of foreign-born persons from a given nation counted in the 1910 census.
To reduce the number of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe, Congress passed the Second Quota Act in 1924 that set quotas of 2% based on the census of 1890, before arrival of most of the new immigrants.
The quota laws were for all European Asian nationalities, but it mainly restricted the groups considered undesirable by nativists.
By 1927, the quota for all Asians and Eastern and Southern Europeans had been limited to 150,000.
With these laws put in place, the traditional United States policy of unlimited immigration came to an end.
Next, let's talk about the case of Sacco and Vanzetti.
In the early 1920s, liberal American artists and intellectuals loudly protested against racial and nativist prejudices. When rallying to the support of two Italian immigrants, Nicola Sacco and Bartolome Vanzetti, who in 1921 had been convicted in Massachusetts of committing robbery and murder.
Liberals protested that the two men were innocent and that they had been accused, convicted, and sentenced to die because they were poor Italians and anarchists.
After 6 years of appeal and debate over the fairness of their trial, Sacco and Vanzetti were executed in 1927. Next up, we have the KKK.
The KKK had the most extreme expression of nativism in the 1920s, which attracted new members because of the popular silent film Birth of a Nation, which portrayed the KKK during Reconstruction as heroes, and the white backlash to the race riots of 1919.
The Klan drew most of its support from lower middle class white Protestants in small cities and towns.
Northern branches of the KKK directed their hostility towards blacks, Catholics, Jews, and foreigners, and suspected communists, pushing them to go back where they came from.
One of Klan's objectives was to create an unwelcoming environment of terror as to halt immigration permanently.
Now let's wrap it up on immigration in the 1920s.
Overall, the 1920s was a particularly difficult time to immigrate or to be an immigrant in the United States.
Prejudice and fear fogged many mindsets, both that of nativists and foreigners.
The better off were out to get those who were looking for a better life.
The 1920s were tough on immigrants, but lucky for them, the decade didn't last forever. That's a wrap on Immigration News.